Hi everyone, my name is Haze Long. I'm an artist and speed painter from Malaysia, and let's do something fun today. Today we are gonna be animating this character in Procreate 5. So a little bit about this character. This character is called Cream Me. So basically it's a lamb with a cream on it. So the cream can be any sort of cream-like substance. So it can be paint or cream. It can also be ice cream. So basically I created this character to accompany the viewers of my YouTube channel, because I know that sometimes when I talk it can be quite annoying. So sometimes I just like to keep quiet and maybe play some animation. So I created this character to accompany you guys, and it's called Creamy because it's made of cream, and me is like the sound that lambs make, like me. So what you're seeing right now is actually the character design for this character, and I was very happy when I was designing this character because it was just so cute. Then I did a little bit of storyboarding, and the first storyboard that you see is actually the intro animation that you see in the beginning of my video. So this video was actually animated by a Fiverr hire. I actually hired an animator in Fiverr that I thought that his style of animation is quite suitable for this character. I wanted a lot of bouncy and fluid movements, and he really delivered his animation. It was really good. I even made a color scheme palette for the animator to follow for all the storyboards that I wanted to fulfill. For the second storyboard, I wanted Creamy to flick up ice cream so that I could direct attention to any information that I'm sharing in the video. And this time, the Fiverr animator did quite an average job. It was okay. It was a little bit compressed horizontally, and I had to fix it in post. And this is how it looks like after I make it wider. For the third storyboard, I asked him if he wanted to do it, but he was not available due to personal reasons, and I thought since Procreate 5 has launched, why don't I try to do it? Since I have a film and animation degree, I might not be so bad at it after all. So let's get started, and I'll show you how I create this animation. So animation in Procreate is really simple. It will just cycle from the first frame at the lowest stack up to the highest frame, and you have to turn on all the layers in order for the animation to work. So if you turn on animation assist here and you just hit play, it will just cycle through and play all the frames that you have in your layers. In the settings bar, you can set the frames per second to control the speed of your animation. So if you turn it down real low, it will just play at 4 frames per second, and you can find a nice speed for your animation this way. Also, if you set it to loop, you just play from beginning to the end and from the beginning to the end again. However, if you set it to ping pong, it will play from the beginning to the end and then from the end to the beginning. So the first thing I did is I duplicated this file in Procreate, and I removed everything except for the storyboard, and then I went to crop and resize to resize my canvas into a size that's suitable for animation. I just set it to 200mm times 100mm for my canvas size. Then I clean up the drawing and try and remove all the colors and separate them from the line art. After that, I imported the lamb body onto my canvas in another layer. Then with these existing layers, I resize and rescale them and position them to fill up my canvas. And I make sure that I have the color layers as well, just so I can use them for reference later on when I'm doing the coloring. If you see here, I have 3 drawings, and these drawings are known as key poses. So for key poses, it means that I actually only need to animate the in-between of these poses. It is very important to be organized when you're doing animation, so I'm trying to organize my layers and make sure that the colors and the previous storyboards are in reference group. So for the rest of my layers, I try to name them as best as I can. Then using the alpha channel, I lock the alpha and I change the color of every single layer so that I know what is what. Now I'm resketching the brush. This brush will actually just be the background of the animation. It will not move and it is static mostly. So I'm resketching this brush because it was low res from all the transformation from the other document and the moving around in rotation. So I'm just resketching it to make sure that the sketch and the line art is high res. Now don't forget to turn on animation assist under the canvas settings in your settings menu. Then to set it as the background, I'm moving this layer down right to the bottom, and then at the animation axis timeline, I can tap on the first frame, which is the brush, and set it to background. Now I'm just going to re-sketch the lamp for the first frame, which is also the first key pose. So now I would want to sketch the lamp for the second key pose, and finally the last key pose. After this is what I have in my layers. Any layers that are hidden won't show up in the timeline, so now in my timeline I have my background, the first group as the first frame, and then follow on with the second and the third key pose in the second and third frame. So now I want to test the speed of the walk, so what I do is I duplicate the first key pose all the way to the second key pose to check how fast this lamb will walk there. So now I see that the lamb is walking a little bit too fast, so I'm going to lower the frames per second and see how it works. If you look here, you can set the onion skin opacity, which means you'll be able to control the other layers and the frames opacity, and also the onion skin frames. If you set it to max, you'll be able to see all the frames. You can also lower it to see less frames. And if you choose to color the secondary frames, all past frames will be in red and all future frames will be in green. To make things simple, I'm gonna do the walking animation on a single spot, which means the lamp won't be moving from right to left, but instead I'll be animating the walking animation in a single spot. So basically what I'm doing right now is I'm just animating the legs only without the body, and after many hours, this is what I have. So now what I want to do is transfer this entire leg group to my original file and paste them onto each section of the body as it walks to the brush. So I basically just copy this leg group and each frame to each group in the original file, and I erase away the legs from the old group. After doing that, this is what I get, and I feel that this is a bit too fast, so I think I have to add in between frames between each current frame that I already have. So if you look here, I have 6 frames per second, so adding in between frames in between them, I will have about 11 to 12 frames in total after that per second. So that is what I'm gonna do to make this animation slower and more fluid. With these new 6 frames as the key poses, I want to animate the bigger motions first, which is the head bobbing up and down and also the tail wagging, before I move on to the in-between frames. This is how it looks like with the head and the tail bobbing up and down as it walks to the brush. While I'm at it, why don't I add the ears moving as well to give it a more bouncy movement? This looks so cute already, and I can't wait to animate the in-between. And now I can do the in-between frames with the onion frame settings to just 2 frames. I can see the previous and the future frame by 1 frame. So this will help me as I sketch the in-between frame. I seriously underestimated the amount of time to do this, but after many hours, this is what I have. So the animation is very fluid now and is running at 8 frames per second, and we'll settle on this frame rate for now. Before I proceed, I want to animate the eyes blinking throughout the walking animation. I love the way it walks, and now we're gonna animate the jumping motion onto the brush. So instead of climbing onto the brush, I want the creme to bend down and hop onto the brush, which will be a bit cuter than just climbing onto the brush. So as it bends down, I want the body and the head to be compressed to give it a squash effect. Is one of the principles of animation. For the hopping effect as it's up in the air, I also want the body to be elongated and stretched to fully emphasize that it is a boing boing effect. I quickly duplicated some frames and move it along the arc of the jump to land onto the brush. And then after that, I resketch each frame to give articulation to the limbs and the body. So for now, this is what I have in the motion. The movement is still pretty stiff, so we're gonna add a lot more squash and stretch into the body itself. I went ahead and go against my intuition and really squash and stretch every single frame here for the jumping arc. Now the animation looks a lot more fluid and natural. So the next thing we're gonna do is add an intro to the animation. So before the cream man starts walking, I want it to look left and right. So I'm gonna animate the head turning. Each time I decide to add some movements like this or more key poses, I ended up spending a lot of time doing this animation. But when I see the result of the animation, it is so cute that I couldn't help but give it more detail. So in support of my new objective of adding more detail, I started doing some mouth movements as it was leaping through the air. And then I'm finally ready to animate the in-betweens and move towards the second main key pose. Moving towards the second key pose is a lot faster than the walking animation because all I have to do is to animate the face, the ears, and the tail, and sometimes the legs. And after this, I'm finally ready to move towards the final key pose, so I'm taking my time to slowly animate each frame. It's sometimes easier to separate the body parts out, so I have the head only and the body, and sometimes just the leg or the tail so that I could quickly edit and erase certain parts. I also try to add a lot of secondary animation, mainly the tail wagging once in a while and blinking. And now I'm finally done with the animation for the body, and I can now move forward to doing the animation of the cream. So back in my old file where every movement is on a single spot, I animate the cream on this file so that I can animate the cream moving and bouncing up and down without worrying how it is positioned across the screen. So the first thing I do is I sketch out the cream and with as many details as I like, because this first sketch will be used to tween across all the other frames. And here I am duplicating this frame across all the other frames that I have and animating the bouncing movement. Once the bouncing movement is done, I started to animate drips that the cream would leak down onto the floor. I animate the upper part of the cream first before worrying about the legs. So because the legs is constantly moving, those frames I have to sketch by hand each time. It's basically really a lot of work and a lot of time spent on this animation. I hide a lot of layers when I'm working so that I just have a few frames that I'm working on at one time, so that when I preview them, I won't be distracted by the long animation of other things. And once I'm done animating the cream, all I need to do is erase away the body so that the drawing of the character is complete. After 2 grueling days of animating the cream and erasing the body, I'm finally ready to bring all these layers to my main animation file. And here is a nifty trick on how you can transfer layers from one file to another. To do this, I am going to go to the file that has all the static layers and select a group of 5 layers. I will then drag this group out, and then using my other finger, I'll tap on gallery, and then I'll tap on my main animation file and wait for it to load. Look at the loading bar, and once it's loaded, I'm impatient, yes. Once it loads, I'm gonna scroll the layers and to the position that I want to copy the layers to. So here I'm counting the number of layers, and then I'm just gonna drag it, and then voila, I've transferred layers from another Procreate file to another Procreate file. And once I'm done moving all the layers, this is what I have. Just be mindful that you can drag and move layers from one file to another, but you cannot drag and move groups from one file to another. So make sure that you select only layers and not groups. So now all I need to do is reposition all these layers that I already have to match the animation that is in this file. I am also cleaning up the sketch as I go. Before I proceed, I'm just going to create a color palette called Creme and dump in all the colors that is related to this drawing. And then using this color palette and a regular brush, I am just going to line everything once and for all for every single frame. At this point, I've already lost track of how much time I've spent on this animation, but I still do have to finish this thing. So this is what I have right now with the complete line art. As you can see, I added a lot of liquid animations and also bubbles coming out of the cream to show a fluid motion and lots of squash and stretch principle in this animation that I did. Finally, it is time to do the coloring. Because the brush is a background that is static and will not move, so I can afford to spend more time to give more details to this brush. Also, let's not forget about the shadow as well. For the character, I decided to have as many layers as possible for each component, like for the face, the tail, the legs, and then certain parts of the cream, so that it's easier for me to animate these colored sections. But do bear in mind that depending on your iPad Pro version and your Procreate version also as well, you are going to run into layer limitations. There is so many times I have to merge layers and delete layers because I ran into the 124 layer limitation in my file. To make things easier for myself, I've decided to have a dark background as I'm working so that I can see if I've colored the character's skin properly, because the character's skin is very close to white. If the background is white, I might miss some spots. Animation is just like any other form of artwork, where the more time you spend, the better it looks. And now Creme is partially brought to life with colors. The last thing that I want to animate is to animate moving highlights, so that it seems like the cream is shining from left to right certain times. I think that doing this gives more interest to the cream because the cream's shading is quite static and just bouncing up and down, so adding the highlights would show that the modeling is actually in 3D. To export the animation, I head up to settings and go to share and share it as PNG files. So basically it will create PNG files of all the layers. So let's just wait for the exporting to be done, and then after that we can share right to my Mac. In my Mac, I launched Final Cut Pro, which is what I use to edit all my videos for YouTube. I have a file just for Creme, and we are going to import all the files that we've exported from Procreate earlier on. So we're just gonna go to File, Import. And here I'm selecting all the files that was imported from Procreate using click and shift, and I'm just gonna hit on Import All. Then all the imported files will be in the project wheel panel, and then I'm going to select all of them and tag them as the Creme 3 roll. Now it's neatly organized, and I'm going to go into File and New Project, and I'm going to create a new project called Creme 3. Then we're going to select all the files that we've imported and drag it onto the timeline. So this will add everything into sequence. Unfortunately, I couldn't figure out for my life to set the image frame to be 1 frame per second, and at this point I really couldn't be bothered. So now the next thing we want to do is, with all the frames still selected, we're going to right click and click on New Compound Clip. Once we do that, this will all merge into one compound clip. And then with the compound clip selected, we can hit the time remapping option, and then we can remap them to a different timing. So I'm just going to make this as fast as I can and see which timing is suitable for this animation. So I'm just gonna go ahead and hit the option again and choose custom this time and dump in a random number. And miraculously, this timing works very well for my animation and I'm pretty happy with it. So now the last step that we want to do is to add in sound effects to bring this character to life. I did all the sound effects for the previous animations as well, and I have the yawn sound effects from the previous animation, so I'm just gonna use that for the yawn in this animation. For the rest of the sound effects, I'm just going to go to epidemicsound.com, which I have subscribed to, and I'm going to download sound effects that are suitable for the rest of the effects. After downloading all these sound effects, I imported them into Final Cut Pro and I started playing around with them to create the sound effects for the walking. I also added a springing sound effects for the jump, and we can always adjust the pitch of the spring later on. It would be a waste not to put sound effects for all the water effects in this animation. There's a lot of drips and water coming out of the cream. I've also adjusted some of the springs and the pops to be higher in pitch because typically cartoon characters are cute because everything is high pitch. Once I'm satisfied with all the sound effects, I am going to export it as a movie. We want transparency in our movie, so we're gonna have to remove this solid background and make sure that the background is non-existent. Then we're gonna go to File and send to Compressor. This will launch Compressor, a video rendering program, and here we're just gonna click on Add. We're going to make sure to choose motion graphics, and under motion graphics we're going to choose quick time progress with alpha. So alpha means there will be transparency, which means the background will be transparent, and then we're going to click on location and select where we want to save this file. Finally, we're just gonna click on start batch and this will start the job. Now all you need to do is to wait for your video to be rendered, and finally this is the video that we have. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with Creamy and I and learning all about animation in Procreate 5. I'll see you guys next time in my next video tutorial. So thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe. Bye!